Great. The young adult was thriving, working as a caregiver for the elderly, and making plans to one day open up her own daycare. At such a young age, she was
Go to sleep at night.
So you never hurt Alishah or hit her or...
Because I know the owner of the house.
Thank you for being here. Before we begin, drop a quick comment below. Where are you listening from, and what time is it there? I truly read every one. Just a quick note, this is a true crime story based on real events and court records. The names, dates and details are factual, presented with respect for those involved. City cameras were recording 6 people inside a car with a kidnapped woman, driving her toward her death. The footage would later reveal faces, license plates, timestamps every second documented by Cleveland's surveillance grid as the vehicle moved through the November night. But the cameras couldn't record what those 6 people were thinking or the catastrophic mistake they had already made. Days earlier, none of that horror existed yet. Alishah Tammy Pointer sat cross-legged on the floor of her Cleveland apartment, watching a tiny kitten bat at a piece of string. At 22, she worked as a caregiver for the elderly, the kind of job that required endless patience and a genuine capacity to sit with other people's frailty without flinching. She was good at it. The work had taught her to listen, to notice small changes, to understand that dignity mattered at the end of life. "This kitten is going to be spoiled," she told her twin sister Aliyah during a phone call, laughing as the small animal pounced on her shoelace. "I can already tell." The apartment was small but warm, filled with the ordinary details of a young woman building a life. Bills on the counter, a half-finished mug of coffee, photos taped to the wall. Tammy had been looking at commercial rental spaces lately, scrolling through listings on her phone during breaks at work. She wanted to open her own daycare one day, something safe and bright. "I've been looking at spaces for the daycare," she told Aliyah. "Nothing fancy, just something safe and bright, somewhere kids would actually want to come." She talked about floor plans and curriculum ideas, debating whether she'd focus on toddlers or pre-K, whether she'd need a playground, or if the nearby park would be enough. She talked about the daycare like it was already half real in her mind, a place she could walk into if she just kept moving forward. The kind of certainty people have about a future they fully expect to reach. The elderly patients she worked with had taught her that time was never guaranteed. But at 22, Tammy still believed she had plenty of it. She had dreams that felt achievable. A kitten that needed feeding. A birthday coming up in 2 days, November 6th. She'd be spending it with Aliyah. Probably doing something simple. Dinner. Maybe a movie. The kitten mewed and curled into her lap. Tammy stroked its tiny head, feeling the soft vibration of its purr against her palm. In 2 days, none of that would matter to the 6 people about to come looking for her. They wouldn't care about her daycare plans, her work with the elderly, or the kitten padding around her apartment. They would care only about someone else entirely. A man named Colin, Tammy's boyfriend, who had a history they wanted to settle. And by the time they realized their mistake, by the time they understood that Tammy Pointer had nothing to do with the grudge they were nursing, it would be far too late. The night before her birthday would change everything. The message from Turquoise arrived just before midnight on November 4th. Tammy's phone lit up on the counter where she'd left it charging. She glanced at the screen and saw her former roommate's name. They hadn't lived together in months, but they still texted occasionally, the kind of low-maintenance friendship that runs on occasional check-ins and small favors. "Hey girl, I picked up some cat litter for you. Can I drop it by real quick? It was the kind of message Tammy received a dozen times a week. Someone offering to drop something off. Picking up an extra item at the store. Doing the small, unremarkable kindnesses that people exchange without thinking twice. She had mentioned needing cat litter a few days earlier, probably in passing during some forgettable conversation. Now Turquoise, her former roommate, who was being forced to make a call she didn't want to make, was following through. Tammy typed back quickly. "Oh, you didn't have to do that." "Yeah, come on over." She grabbed her keys from the hook by the door. The kitten was asleep in a cardboard box lined with an old towel, curled into a tight ball of fur. Tammy pulled on a jacket and texted again. "Be out in just a sec." There was nothing in the message that would make anyone hesitate. No odd phrasing, no unusual request, no time pressure. It was ordinary to the point of invisibility, and that was precisely what made it dangerous. The everyday texture of the exchange disguised the trap completely. Turquoise's words gave no hint that she was being coerced, that someone was watching her type, that the offer of cat litter was bait, designed to pull Tammy out of her apartment and into reach. Tammy locked the door behind her and walked down the hallway toward the building's entrance. Her phone was in her pocket, her keys jangled against her thigh. She was thinking about whether she had enough food for the kitten to last through the weekend, whether she'd need to stop at the pet store tomorrow after work. Ordinary thoughts for an ordinary errand. She pushed open the exterior door and stepped outside. November in Cleveland was cold enough to see her breath. The streetlights cast orange pools across the pavement. She looked toward the curb, expecting to see Turquoise's car idling near the entrance, expecting a quick exchange, bag of litter handed over, brief hug, maybe a promise to catch up soon over coffee. What was waiting for her outside wasn't a friend with cat litter. It was a car full of people who didn't even want her. They wanted Colin, Tammy's boyfriend, the man with a history they'd come to settle. But Colin wasn't there. Tammy was. And in the confusion and rage that followed, in the catastrophic misidentification that would drive everything that came next, Tammy Pointer became the target of violence meant for someone else entirely. She stepped outside, expecting a small gift for her cat. She was about to pay the price for a mistake she would never understand. They were on her before she could process what was happening. 4 people emerged from a vehicle parked at the curb. Not Turquoise's car, a different one entirely. Hakeem Ali Shomo, who had orchestrated this kidnapping, seeking revenge for his nephew Mo's murder, moved toward her first. Portria Williams, Mo's pregnant girlfriend, there for revenge, blocked her path back to the building. Destiny Henderson, still a minor, held something dark and angular at her side that Tammy's brain registered half a second too late as a gun. Nathaniel Polk, Jr., who had been feuding with Colin online before Mo's death, circled around to cut off any escape route. "Where is he?" Hakeem's voice was flat, controlled. "Where's Colin?" Tammy's mind scrambled to catch up. Colin? Her boyfriend? What did these people want with Colin? What are you talking about?" She turned toward Turquoise, who stood frozen near the passenger door, eyes down. "Turquoise, what's going on?" Turquoise didn't answer. She didn't move. That silence told Tammy everything she needed to know about who had sent that text message and why. "Get in the car," Portria said. "Now." "I don't know what you—" Don't play stupid. Hakeem stepped closer. You know exactly what this is about. Mo. You know what Colin did. Mo. Tammy had never heard that name before in her life. She shook her head, backing up until she felt the cold brick of her building against her spine. They weren't there for Tammy at all. They wanted Colin, and believed she could lead them to him. But she had no idea what they were talking about. No idea who Mo was, or what Colin supposedly did. I don't know anyone named Mo, she said. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. Please, I don't. Destiny raised the gun. The world narrowed to that single point, the barrel, the hand holding it, the casual way it was aimed at her chest. Tammy's knees went weak. She still thought there had been some kind of mistake, something that could be explained. If she could just make them understand that they had the wrong person, that she wasn't involved in whatever they thought she was involved in. They would let her go back inside, and this would be over. Last chance, Hakeem said, in the car, or we do this right.
Go to sleep at night.
So you never hurt Alishah or hit her or...
They wanted him to feel his helplessness through the screen, to watch someone he loved become a hostage and know there was nothing he could do from Detroit. Psychological torture through a screen. You tell the police, Hakeem's voice again, and she's done. You understand? The call ended. Colin stared at the black screen, his reflection staring back. His hands were shaking. He knew exactly one thing for certain. Tammy needed the police. Now. He had just watched someone he loved become a hostage, and the person holding her wanted him to know it was his fault. Aliyah woke after midnight to an empty apartment and a feeling she couldn't shake. Her sister's bed was empty. Not unusual, Tammy kept odd hours sometimes. Worked late shifts caring for elderly patients, stayed up late on the phone with Colin. But something felt wrong. Aliyah, Tammy's twin sister, who knew something was wrong the moment she woke to find her missing, checked her phone and found a text from her sister's number. Out with turquoise, be back later. The words were fine, the timing was fine, everything should have been fine. But Aliyah had spent her whole life in sync with her twin, finishing each other's sentences, knowing when the other was upset before a word was spoken, feeling echoes of each other's moods across distance. And right now, every instinct she had was screaming. She called Tammy's number. It rang once, then went to voicemail. She texted back. No response. She called turquoise. The phone rang and rang. No answer. Aliyah paced the apartment, scrolling back through earlier texts, looking for anything that explained this hollow dread settling in her chest. She told herself she was overreacting. Tammy was fine. She was out with a friend. She'd be home soon. Then Colin called. His voice came through the speaker, frantic, breathless. Aliyah, they have her. I just saw her on FaceTime. She's crying. She can't talk. Someone else has her phone. The floor tilted beneath her feet. What? Who has her? I don't know. Some guy. He was taunting me, showing me her face. She's in a car with multiple people. They told me not to call the police. Aliyah was already grabbing her keys, her jacket. Where are you? Detroit. I'm hours away. You need to get to the police, now. She had spent her whole life reading her twin without words, and every instinct she had was screaming that something was terribly wrong. This wasn't Tammy going out with a friend. This was something else, something worse. Aliyah drove to the police department through empty streets, her hands gripping the wheel so tight her knuckles ached. She replayed the text in her mind. Out with turquoise. The casual tone, the lack of detail, it didn't sound like Tammy. It sounded like someone pretending to be Tammy. Inside the station, fluorescent lights made everything feel too bright, too stark. She approached the desk, trying to keep her voice steady. You need to find my sister, right now. She's been kidnapped. The officer looked up to pen hovering over a notepad. How do you know she's been kidnapped? Her boyfriend just saw her on FaceTime. She's in a car with people who won't let her speak. They're holding her. The shift in the officer's expression told her everything. This was no longer a worried family member imagining the worst. This was real. What started as a missing person case transformed in an instant into a confirmed kidnapping. Someone was holding Tammy against her will, and time was running out. By morning, this would no longer be a question of whether something had happened. It would be a race to find her before 6 people holding her in Cleveland decided she'd outlived her usefulness. The detective had 6 names written on the board, and half of them had nicknames he was still trying to match to faces. The detective leading the case had to piece together 6 suspects from Turquoise's fragmented account, and the clock was already running. Somewhere in Cleveland. Those 6 people were holding Tammy, and every minute spent sorting through names was a minute she didn't have. Turquoise sat across from him in the interrogation room, hands shaking as she walked through the ambush for the 3rd time. Her voice kept breaking, kept circling back to the same details as if repetition could undo what had happened. Walk me through it again. Who grabbed you first? Destiny had the gun on me, Turquoise said. Hakeem was looking through my phone for Tammy's location. They knew we shared our locations with each other. He found it right away. Location sharing, the kind of safety feature friends activate so they can find each other in a crowd. Check that someone got home safe. In this case, it had become a tracking device that led 6 people straight to their target. And the others? Portria was there, Nathaniel. 2 more, I think. One was Anthony, but I'm not sure. They kept using nicknames, talking over each other. 6 people. The detective wrote down each name as Turquoise gave it, adding question marks next to the ones she couldn't confirm. Hakeem Ali Shomo, the ringleader, the one who'd orchestrated the ambush. Portria Williams. Destiny Henderson, the one with the gun. Nathaniel Polk Jr. Anthony Bryant? Maybe. And 2 more he still couldn't pin down. Brittany Smith, and someone else Turquoise hadn't seen clearly. He had to hold 6 overlapping names and nicknames in his head at once, knowing one wrong thread could cost time they didn't have. The complexity was mounting. Multiple suspects, multiple locations, a victim who seemed to have no connection to any of them. And the motive still made no sense. And you're certain none of them said why they wanted her specifically? They kept asking about Colin, kept saying he knew what he did, something about someone named Mo. Mo. The detective circled the name on his notepad. Colin's girlfriend kidnapped because of someone named Mo. A grudge. A revenge plot. A case of mistaken identity. The pieces weren't connecting yet. They forced you to text her, made you lure her out. Turquoise nodded, tears streaming down her face. They had a gun on me. They said if I didn't get her outside, they'd come in and get both of us. Coercion under threat of violence. Turquoise wasn't a willing participant. She was another victim caught in the machinery of whatever vendetta had targeted Tammy. But that didn't change the fact that her text message had worked, that Tammy had trusted her and walked straight into a trap. The detective stood looking at the board. 6 names, multiple nicknames, a victim with no apparent connection. Somewhere in that tangle of names was the truth about why Tammy had been taken at all, and it made no sense yet. 6 people, overlapping connections he was still mapping. One woman whose only crime seemed to be dating the wrong person. The detective pulled Colin's phone records first, then his whereabouts for the night Mo was killed. If 6 people had kidnapped Tammy, believing Colin was responsible for a murder, then the first step was simple: confirm or rule out Colin's involvement. The motive had to make sense before the investigation could move forward. If Colin had actually killed Mo, this was revenge. If he hadn't, this was something worse. A catastrophic mistake built on rumour and rage. Colin sat in the interrogation room, exhausted from the drive back from Detroit. His hands flat on the table. Your posts about Mo explain what you meant by that. Colin exhaled slowly. I was talking trash, that's it. I didn't kill anyone. I was in Detroit that whole night. What did you say exactly? Stupid stuff. Nathaniel and I went back and forth online. He'd post something, I'd fire back. It was just talk. The detective pulled up screenshots from Colin's social media. Posts from early November. Inflammatory language. Taunting comments that could, if you squinted, if you were already angry, if you wanted to believe the worst, sound like confession. But words on a screen weren't evidence, they were noise. Phone records confirm it, an officer said, sliding a printout across the table. He wasn't anywhere near the scene. Colin's phone had pinged cell towers in Detroit the entire night of November 2nd, when Mo was shot in Cleveland. The location data was unambiguous. He was 300 miles away. No gaps in the timeline. No suspicious movements. No way he could have been in 2 places at once. The lead collapsed under its own weight. A joking comment online was never evidence, only noise that sounded like confession to people who wanted to hear it. Nathaniel had feuded with Colin, seen the posts, and filled in the blanks with his own certainty. Then he'd told Hakim, who'd told Portria, who'd gathered the others. 6 people had built a case for murder out of nothing but screen captures and rage. So they took her for nothing, Colin said, his voice hollow. They took Tammy because they think I killed Mo, and I was nowhere near.
She's right here at the bottom of the stairs. Yeah.
The search that had consumed days, the interviews, the camera footage, the frantic hope that maybe she was still alive somewhere, ended in that basement. No rescue, no reunion. Just confirmation of what everyone had begun to fear from the moment that photo was sent. "We need the coroner," one officer said into his radio, his voice carefully controlled. Another officer moved to secure the scene, marking it off, beginning the documentation that would turn this abandoned house into a crime scene. Every step had to be precise now. Every detail would matter in court. "Confirm we have a deceased female at this location." The radio call came through, flat and procedural. Because it had to be. Because someone had to stay steady enough to do the job. To follow protocol. To treat this moment with the professionalism it required, even when the emotional weight of it pressed down on everyone present. She had been missing since November 4th. 2 days of captivity. of being held by people who saw her as nothing more than a means to find Colin, who punished her for answers she didn't have, who eventually decided she was a liability they couldn't afford to keep. The coroner would later determine cause of death. The autopsy would document injuries. The evidence would be collected and catalogued and presented in court. But standing in that basement, the officers already knew the essential truth. Tammy had died here, far from home, far from her twin sister, far from the daycare she'd dreamed of opening one day. She had died in an abandoned house for a lie she never even knew existed. A rumour spread online had spiralled into a kidnapping and then into murder. Colin's trash talk had been read as confession by people who wanted it to be true. 6 people had taken Tammy, based on nothing but rage and certainty and the belief that she could lead them to someone who had nothing to do with Mo's death in the first place. And Tammy never understood why any of it was happening to her. She'd told them over and over she didn't know where Colin was, didn't know what they were talking about, couldn't give them answers that didn't exist. But they didn't believe her. And that disbelief had cost her everything. Destiny Henderson sat in the interrogation room and started talking before the detective even asked the first question. With Tammy's body found, with the charges mounting, with the reality of what she was facing settling in, Destiny chose cooperation over loyalty. She was 17. The others were adults. And she'd watched Hakeem lead them into a kidnapping that became a murder, all based on a rumour that never should have been believed. "I didn't want to be part of this," she said, her voice small. "But Hakeem, he was so sure Colin killed Mo." The detective let her talk. Destiny described the night Mo was killed. November 2nd. Before any of this started, Mo had been shot, and Hakeem was devastated, his nephew gone. The family was looking for someone to blame, and then Colin's posts started showing up on social media. Inflammatory language, taunting comments, words that, if you were already looking for a villain, sounded like confession. Nathaniel had been fighting with Colin online, Destiny explained. And when Mo died, Nathaniel told Hakeem that Colin was involved, that he'd killed Mo. But Colin hadn't killed Mo. He'd been in Detroit. The phone records proved it. The social media posts were just noise, trash talk that meant nothing except to people who wanted it to mean something. "We thought she knew where he was," Destiny continued. "We thought she was protecting him, that if we scared her enough, she'd tell us." But Tammy didn't know. She couldn't tell them what she didn't know, and the more she insisted on her ignorance, the more they believed she was lying. She talked fast, almost relieved to finally say it out loud, even knowing what it cost her. The weight of keeping the secret, of carrying the knowledge of what they'd done, had been crushing her since the moment Tammy's body was left in that basement. "I know it sounds crazy now," Destiny said, tears streaming down her face, "but at the time, we all believed it. Hakeem was so sure." And Brittany. She kept saying Tammy was lying, that we just had to push harder. The detective made notes. Every word Destiny said was adding to the case against all of them. But some details mattered more than others. "Who was there at the end?" he asked. "Most of us," Destiny said quietly. "Hakeem, Brittany, Anthony, me, Portria. We were all there." "And who pulled the trigger?" Destiny hesitated, then answered. She told the truth about almost everything. The kidnapping, the captivity, the torture, the false promises Brittany had made. She laid it all out, every person involved, every location, every moment of Tammy's final 2 days. But someone else still hadn't told the truth. Someone else sat in another interrogation room down the hall, constructing an alibi, convinced they could still get away with it, still believed the cameras hadn't seen them, still thought they could lie their way out of a murder charge. Brittany Smith told the detective she'd spent that entire day sitting alone in a stranger's backyard.
I did not kill that girl.
I never said you did.
I did not kidnap that girl. I was not.
She was the one who'd spent hours constructing this story, believing cameras couldn't contradict what she'd say, believing she could talk her way past evidence. The interrogation room was quiet, deliberately unhurried. The detective let her talk herself into a corner. "I was in the backyard all day," Brittany said. Her voice was calm, confident. "I needed to charge my phone. That's why I went inside." She repeated the backyard detail twice. The stranger who let her sit there, the phone that needed charging, the hours spent alone doing nothing. The story came out smooth. Too smooth, each word in the same order as before. The detective watched her carefully. He'd heard plenty of lies before, but the good ones rarely sounded this rehearsed. "Walk me through it again," he said. Brittany did. Same words, same sequence. He watched her repeat the backyard story twice, word for word, like something she'd practiced in a mirror. People telling the truth stumbled over details, corrected themselves, added things they'd forgotten the first time. Liars told the same story exactly the same way every time.
You got 5 people, there were 5 people putting you there.
5 people putting me where?
Brittany's expression didn't change immediately. She blinked once, processing. "What cameras?" "City surveillance, East Cleveland." He slid a still image across the table, Brittany's face caught in frame, walking up to Hakeem's front door. The timestamp matched the exact day she'd claimed to be alone. The same cameras that caught the car fire caught you arriving at Hakeem's house. The silence that followed was long. Brittany didn't confess. But she stopped arguing the specifics. She sat back in her chair, arms crossed, eyes on the wall instead of the detective's face. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. The moment when someone realizes their carefully constructed story has just collapsed. "You have 5 people," the detective continued. 5 people putting you there. Destiny, Portria, Nathaniel, Anthony, Turquoise. Every single one of them describes you being in that house with Tammy. 5 people had already turned on her, each one putting her at the scene. Each one describing what she did, the needle held to Tammy's neck, the plastic wrap over her face, the false promises that nothing bad would happen, the lie that Tammy would go home soon. "I want a lawyer," Brittany said quietly. The detective nodded. The interrogation was over, but the damage was done. She'd spent the first 15 minutes digging herself deeper into a provable lie, and now 5 witnesses were lining up to testify against her. She said she wasn't there. The camera said otherwise. And 5 people who had been in that house with her were already telling investigators exactly what she'd done to Tammy in those final hours, how she'd tortured her, lied to her, promised her freedom she had no intention of granting. Destiny's voice got quieter when she reached the part about that final night. 5 people had already described what Brittany did to Tammy, the torture, the lies, the false promises. Now came the part Destiny had been dreading most. describing how it ended. "We climbed the gate to get to the second house," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "All of us. Brittany, Portria, Anthony, me. Anthony Bryant, who pulled the trigger and shot Tammy in the abandoned house, had been quiet through most of the investigation. He hadn't cooperated. He hadn't confessed. But destiny was about to place him at the scene with a gun in his hand. The detective waited. "Brittany unwrapped the plastic from Tammy's face," Destiny continued, "and she told her," her voice broke, "she told her, 'You're going to be okay. Nothing's going to happen to you.'" After 2 days of captivity, after the photo with the gun in her mouth, after the needle and the suffocation and the beatings, Tammy had been given the smallest, cruelest gift, hope. Brittany's voice was soft, almost kind. She promised Tammy that this nightmare was over, that she'd be released, that she could go home. Tammy believed her, Destiny said, tears streaming down her face. She actually thought she was going home. Brittany's kind words promising Tammy she'd be okay, that nothing bad would happen, were the cruelest lie of all. Spoken softly, gently, seconds before Anthony Bryant raised the gun. Destiny still stood frozen in the telling. She'd done nothing to stop it then, and she couldn't undo that by telling the truth now. But she told it anyway, because the alternative was carrying the secret alone. "Then I heard the gun," she said quietly, "and Tammy was gone." The interrogation room was silent. Anthony Bryant was the one who shot Tammy, while Brittany and Portria stood by and watched it happen. While Destiny stood by, while a young woman who'd stepped outside to help a kitten, who'd been kidnapped because of a lie she never knew existed, who'd spent 2 days begging to understand why this was happening to her, died in an abandoned basement, believing for one final moment that she was about to be saved. The detective made notes. Every detail mattered for the prosecution. But some details cut deeper than evidence. Tammy believed, for a moment, that she was going home. She believed Brittany's soft voice and gentle promises. She believed that after 2 days of horror, someone had finally decided to show her mercy. Then she heard the gun, and in that instant, everything that Tammy could have been, the daycare she dreamed of opening, the kitten waiting in her apartment, the 23rd birthday she'd never see, the twin sister who would spend the rest of her life with half her heart missing, disappeared. The courtroom felt colder than Tammy's last night alive. Hakeem Ali Shomo sat in the defendant's chair, hands cuffed behind his back, face expressionless as the judge shuffled papers and prepared to deliver the sentence that would close one chapter of this horror. Everything Tammy could have been had disappeared in an abandoned basement. Now came the accounting for the 6 people who made it happen. The judge began with the verdict summary: kidnapping, aggravated murder, conspiracy. Each charge read aloud, each one carrying the weight of what had been done to a young woman whose only crime was trusting the wrong text message. Hakeem Ali Shomo, the architect of this nightmare, showed nothing. No remorse, no acknowledgement. He'd orchestrated the kidnapping, convinced his co-conspirators that Colin had killed Mo, led them in hunting down an innocent woman and holding her captive for 2 days. He'd never admitted guilt, but the jury had convicted him anyway. "Life in prison plus 25 years, the judge said. "No possibility of parole." Absolute silence filled the courtroom for 3 full seconds. No gasps, No reactions. Just the weight of finality settling over everyone present. Hakim would die in prison. There was no other outcome now. Anthony Bryant sat beside him, the man who'd pulled the trigger, the man who'd ended Tammy's life while Brittany stood by with her false promises still echoing. Bryant had refused to cooperate with investigators, maintained his silence, offered nothing. Life in prison, the judge said. No possibility of parole. 2 life sentences. 2 men who would never walk free again. Nathaniel Polk Jr. was next. The online rival who'd fed Hakim the lie about Colin, who'd helped kidnap Tammy, who'd been there through the captivity but hadn't pulled the trigger himself. 23 to 28 years. Still decades, still most of a lifetime. But the sentence carried the acknowledgement that not all guilt was equal, that there were degrees of culpability, even in a crime this brutal. Aliyah sat in the gallery, watching the men who'd killed her twin sister learn their fates. The prosecutor had asked if she wanted to give a victim impact statement now, but she declined. Words felt insufficient. No sentence could bring Tammy back. No punishment could undo what these 6 people had done. Court officers moved forward, preparing to escort the 3 men out. Hakim stood first, still expressionless. Bryant followed, eyes on the floor. Nathaniel last, younger than the others, facing decades behind bars for following rage instead of reason. The prosecutor stood as the bailiffs led them through the side door. The 3 men disappeared from view, headed toward decades, lifetimes in prison. But the work wasn't finished. The court will reconvene tomorrow, the judge said, for the sentencing of Portria Williams, Brittany Smith, and Destiny Henderson. 3 more defendants sat in the gallery, watching their co-conspirators vanish into custody. Their day of reckoning had just begun. Portria Williams had been the one who lured Tammy into the car, and now she stood before the same judge, her fate in his hands. The 3 men were already sentenced, already on their way to decades behind bars. Now came the 3 women who'd participated in the kidnapping, the torture, the murder. The judge's voice was measured, deliberate, as he addressed each one. Portria stood first. The woman whose role had been clear from the beginning. She'd been part of the group that pulled Tammy from her home, who'd held her captive, who'd stood by while others tortured her. You exploited a vulnerable young woman's trust and delivered her to her death, the judge said. Portria showed no visible emotion, no tears, no acknowledgement of what she'd done. The court sentences you to life in prison with parole eligibility after 23 years. 23 years! Portria would be middle-aged before she could even ask to be released. Tammy would still be 22 forever. Brittany Smith came next. The woman who'd tortured Tammy with needle and plastic wrap, who'd spoken soft lies promising freedom, who'd told Tammy she'd be okay seconds before someone else pulled the trigger. Your actions demonstrate a callousness that shocks the conscience, the judge said. You gave false hope to a woman who was already suffering, and you did so knowing what was about to happen to her.
But I found this out like after, I'm not involved with these people.
Sure. Yeah.
It is about the cost of assumptions, the danger of mob mentality, and the irreversible consequences when we act without knowing the facts. If this story moved you, please leave a comment below. Share your thoughts or simply let me know you were here. If you want more true crime stories told with care and respect, please like and subscribe. It helps more than you know. And if someone needs to hear this message about truth and the danger of rumors, feel free to share. Thank you for listening with me today. I hope Tammy's story stays with you, not as entertainment, but as a reminder to pause, to verify, to choose truth over assumption. This case is based on real events and court records from Cleveland, Ohio. Some scenes have been dramatized for storytelling, but the facts, the names, dates, and tragedy are real. My deepest respect goes to Alishah Tammy Pointer's family, especially her twin sister, Aliyah, who carries this loss every day.
Losing my twin sister is a loss that cannot be measured or repaired.